we'll finish with the 8 limbs of yoga. The last 3 limbs are Dharana, concentration, Dhyana, meditation, and Samadhi. Dharana, concentration, can take you from the manifest to the unmanifest. So in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras it's written that very, very powerful concentration allows you to get beyond the surface of an object so that you can realize the raw material or substance of something. So Patanjali says, if you're looking at a rock and your concentration is so intense that you can understand the nature of the rock, then you'll have mastery over the rock. So in a science like telekinesis, where somebody moves an object through mind power, it's because they can go inside an object and recognize the nature of that object. For example, in imperial China, they had these court painters, and the emperor would ask the painter to go and paint such and such mountain. And in those days, the royal court painter would sit before the mountain for a whole month and just meditate on the mountain. The theory was that after a month, the painter would understand the nature of the mountain. So he wouldn't even touch the paintbrush for a month until he understood the nature of that mountain. And you can see this in art sometimes, you know. Somebody will create a masterpiece only after understanding the absolute nature of what he or she is painting. In any case, intense concentration will give you powers, like telepathy, the ability to plant thoughts in somebody else's mind, the ability to manipulate or move an object. And according to Patanjali, when your concentration muscles become very, very powerful, you then go from the visible world into the subatomic world and attain spiritual control over whatever you're concentrating on. In terms of meditation, there are 2 ways to get to the absolute height of meditation. One is mindfulness, the other is concentration. Mindfulness is like an open field. You go to a riverbed, and there are birds singing, there's hailing, and there's the fragrance of blossoms, and you just open yourself up. And in opening up mindfulness, you take in the perfume of the blossoms, you hear the roaring river, you feel the hail, all of it together. So mindfulness is an absolute opening up. Concentration is laser-like. So when you discuss concentration versus mindfulness, there are 2 opposite directions. But the interesting thing is, half of the world's meditation techniques come from mindfulness, the other half come from concentration. Kriya Yoga, for example, is a concentration exercise. Vipassana, the Buddhist meditation, is mindfulness. So when you sit for Vipassana, you're simply aware of whatever goes on, anything. You know, how do my thighs feel? How am I breathing? What sounds am I hearing in the room? The intensity of mindfulness will take you to Samadhi or Nirvana, as the Buddhists call it. The intensity of concentration will also take you to Nirvana or Samadhi. They both lead to the same place. It's just interesting because they're 2 opposite directions. So you have to figure out your nature. Are you a concentrated person, or can you be very aware of everything that's going on? These are 2 different natures. For example, I could give you a Vipassana meditation tonight. That's very different, because I just ask you to sit and notice your breathing. Notice the sounds in the room, like that. You just notice. Notice the lights behind your eyelids. Very different from concentration. According to Patanjali, there are several levels of concentration. See which one of these you've reached. The most superficial level of concentration is that, let's say, there is a person named Catherine, there is a piece of music, let's say Vivaldi, and then there's the act of listening. So at the most superficial level, there's Catherine, the act of listening, and Vivaldi. And then the next deeper stage of concentration, Vivaldi becomes so beautiful that Catherine, the personality and the ego, melts into the music. So in the second stage, you have the act of listening and Vivaldi, but the listener, named Catherine, is no longer there. That's level 2 concentration. Most of you have attained that, especially with music. Some of you are painters, photographers. You've been able to lose yourself in the photograph. The third one is unlikely. The third one gets you right to nirvana or samadhi. In the third one, you are so engulfed by whatever you're doing that Catherine, the listener, the act of listening, and the Vivaldi music all disappear into a hum. So in a state of nirvana or samadhi, there's no you, there's no act of perception, and there is nothing that you melt into. The entire thing becomes one pulse. No person, no participation in meditation, and nothing to melt into. So when they talk about the one, from the one came the many, when you become the one, all duality disappears. There is no person going into samadhi. Actually, many of you lose your person even at the current stage of meditation. You're already doing that. Let's go on to the next topic, Dhyana meditation. Meditation means the witnessing part of the mind starts to witness the rambling part of the mind. So, mind turns against the mind, and the wise part of the mind starts watching and observing the bickering or rambling mind. The minute the higher mind, called the buddhi, the minute the higher mind starts to watch the intellectual mind dissolves. This is why if you stare at a solid surface and wait for the next thought never comes. As long as you're waiting for the next thought never comes, because the one who's waiting is the witness. In other words, the force that's waiting is called pure consciousness, or the witness. Meditation is best done in regular hours. The best time in the morning is just when the sun is coming up, because the earth is being bombarded by electromagnetic waves, and electromagnetism deepens meditation. Regularity, very important. Lifelong meditation, very important. The other thing is, you don't pay attention to your meditative experiences. You just keep meditating. Every time you meditate, your mind bathes in wisdom. Never mind what you think of the meditation. Some attitudes that really harm meditation: expectation, curiosity, the attitude of I, me, meditating. The I needs to melt into meditation. You cannot get into any act of worship with the word I. As long as the word I exists, you are not in worship. You're not in meditation. So your challenge is to melt down the notion of I when you meditate. There should be no such notion. The objects of meditation, in terms of what you're meditating on, depends on which school of meditation you're following. Some people meditate on light, some people meditate on a holy person. The most difficult thing to meditate on is the most invisible thing, which is the mind meditating on the mind. That is the most advanced meditation. You witnessing your own mind while not believing your own mind. You're simply looking at it. That's the most challenging. It's a lot easier to take the picture of Christ, whom you love, and meditate on Christ, because it shows a face, it shows something palpable. So meditation on the mind is the most difficult. Meditation on the breath, I believe, is the most powerful, a science like Kriya Yoga, because breath is the carrier of the God force. So when you meditate on the breath, you're literally bringing in the God force as you meditate. I want to mention Samadhi as the 8th limb of yoga. Samadhi is when you literally melt down as a person, as an ego, into the pulse of the God force. It's unity with that one force. Samadhi cannot be achieved through your efforts. In other words, it's like a passport to heaven. So people who enter Samadhi have to have the grace of the Guru or the Master, and or even more importantly, they have to have the grace of the God force. So somebody needs to allow you into a state of Samadhi. However, there are prerequisites, and if you have those prerequisites, you are much more likely to enter Samadhi. For example, if you have a very faded ego, your sense of me is very faded, you have a much greater chance. If you're basically a person who's surrendered to divinity and God, you have a much greater chance. If you have less childhood wounds, if you're less defensive, because of a healthier childhood, you have a greater chance. Although when we talk about wounds, some people are quite wounded as a teenager, and then they just drop the wounds as a story. If you drop your life story, then you're at par with somebody who's not wounded, emotionally and psychologically. In Samadhi, your body goes through major physiological changes. For example, the hemisphere of the brain fall into sync. They all start to pulsate at the same rate. The other thing is the amount of air being carried through both nostrils become equalized. The heartbeat comes way down, something like 72 beats per minute can come down to 3 heartbeats per minute. The brainwave activity goes through a very unusual change in Samadhi. Typically, your brainwave activity at the beta waves is about 14 cycles per second, tall waves. In Samadhi, you go down to 0.5. So if a neurologist sees you, they think you're in coma. At 0.5 cycles per second, a neurologist will tell you that you are in coma. But that is the state of Samadhi. So one thing I'm telling you in terms of contact with God, the more subtle your brain waves become, the closer you get to divinity. Meaning, the more still the mind becomes, the closer you are to being a holy person. There are 2 levels of Samadhi. There's Samadhi with seed and seedless Samadhi. Samadhi with seed means that you go through 28.8 minutes of non-thought. You get to witness your mind or witness no mind When you come back from Samadhi with seed, you still come back as Catherine, Bob, Joseph, whatever your name is. You come back from Samadhi with seed as an ego, except the ego will have relinquished and surrendered to the soul, mostly. Seedless Samadhi is when you totally and forever dissolve your identity into the divine throb of the God force. You literally become one with the universal throb, which is Brahman. When you emerge back from seedless Samadhi, there is no person left. So for example, if you want to be a teacher of yoga, you would not do a good job after returning from seedless Samadhi. Because there's no social personality left. And a teacher needs to interact with the students. You do become a beacon, you become like a searchlight. You're full of electricity. But you probably won't even be able to talk after seedless Samadhi. You simply become the throb of the Lord. Thank you.